What I want to talk about today is one of my favorite negotiating techniques, which is called the hairy arm principle. And I use it all the time. Yeah, I named it after you, actually.
It's not that hairy.
No, I use this one all the time. I really like it a lot because what it is, it's like playing 4D chess when you're negotiating with somebody.
Is that a Star Trek reference?
That's a Star Trek reference.
Nerd alert.
So yeah, I mean, what you're doing is basically using some distractions. I mean, you hear all the time people say like, oh, you start low and start lower than what you want, and then you'll work your way up.
Like
to
Daniel is like $1.
Yeah, I'll give you $1. He who speaks first loses, that kind of stuff, right? But these are all methods that people are somewhat familiar with at this point in time. So they know to look out for it. The whole he who speaks first loses. Like sometimes you'll run into, and it's not common, but sometimes you'll run into somebody where you're really trying to make them speak first, and they'll throw you one of those. They're like, all right, whatever, $1. I'll give you $1. You're like, oh my gosh. So they understand that. They understand, okay, well, you're going to start lower than you're actually willing to do, and so you're going to negotiate up from there. And there's several techniques that you can use to kind of combat that whenever you're trying to work with them to say, like, no, this is my offer and I want you to take it. And then there's other things that you can do to use your 4D chess where it's you can use the fact that they know those techniques against them, so they get so hard-nosed focused on the one number that you're talking about that you're able to get something else out of it that you actually want.
Okay, so what does a hairy arm have to do with 4D chess or a contract negotiation?
Let's tie it all together.
Yeah,
all right,
ready there?
So here's the thing. There was and I meant to look up what magazine this was for. There was a magazine, one of the bigger publications, and there was a photographer. Here, I'm sure all of you out here have had one of those bosses where it didn't matter what it was, but the boss was going to deny something about your project just so that they could have a finger on it. You know what I mean? You could present the perfect thing to them, and they're going to be like, oh man, that's great, but you need to change this.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
You've never had that before, huh?
Nope.
So you've all had that person that's got to have their hand on it. And most people have that kind of even in the back of their mind too. So what this photographer would do, he had one of those bosses, what he would do is he wanted this picture that was like this, right? He wanted a picture that was in this frame. So what he would do is he would take the picture, but he would make the picture this big, and he would have some dude with a really hairy arm holding a drink like right up against the camera outside on this edge of it, right?
So purposefully adding a flaw.
Purposefully adding a flaw to it. The picture was framed great, looked wonderful, purposefully added a flaw over here. He would set it in front of his boss, and his boss would say, I love it, but you got to get rid of the hairy arm. And he'd go, oh gosh, okay. So he would get rid of the hairy arm.
And then basically he's already had the finished product ready to go.
Yeah. He already had it cropped out. He already had the picture that he wanted, but he knew that his boss was going to spot that hairy arm and point it out.
So basically he had his end goal in sight, and then he just added some BS.
Right.
Okay, so how does that translate into, say, real estate?
Lots of different opportunities.
Like what would be a hairy arm?
Yeah, so lots of different opportunities in that. And so this is where the chess reference comes from, is because what happens there is that, like I said, he had an end goal in mind. He wanted this framed picture, but he put a distraction outside of frame so that, because he knew that the boss was going to notice that distraction, he knew the boss was going to hone in on that and want that to be the negotiation point, so he could fight on that hairy arm, but he's left with what he really wanted. Here's an example that's a little bit more real life for you guys, okay? A little bit more of something that you might be familiar with, and then we'll transition in where I use this into real estate. Think about like when you've got a kid and they're going to bed, and you give them the option, and you say, okay, well, do you want to brush your teeth before or after you put your PJs on? Well, now the fight is about brushing their teeth. The fight is not about them putting their PJs on. But you needed them to put their PJs on, right? So that
I would hope that you would need them to brush their teeth too.
Right. But you choose your battles, right?
Clearly, his kid is still in that.
Yeah, my kid doesn't even have teeth yet.
The little peanut stage.
I'm going off of theory here.
Me too. I don't have any kids.
But what we're doing here is we're setting up the argument for what we want the argument to be about. So here's how I use it in real estate all the time. Now, you can use this, and I'll give you a couple different examples. I'll give you an example for like cash contracts. I'll give you an example for how I use this with owner financed deals. I use this with owner finance deals all the time, okay? And this is how I get 0% interest loans from my sellers, is through using the hairy arm principle. When I'm buying a house from somebody and my seller has, equity in it, maybe I'm going to pay them their equity over time. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to present, hey, I'm going to pay you your equity over time, and I'm going to pay you interest on that equity. That's where I'm setting up my hairy arm. It's all part of the to steal a Caldini reference, a persuasion, right? So it's all part of that. So I'm going to say, I'm going to pay you your equity over installments, and I'm going to pay you interest on it. Now, from that point on, my entire pitch is going to be about the interest and how awesome that interest is. And it is awesome. And those that accept my offer are going to be in a good position. But what I do is I'm saying, okay, so you've got $30,000 that I'm going to pay you, but I'm going to pay it to you in installments, and I'm going to give you 4.5% interest. And so what that calculates out to be, I'm going to run my calculator on it and watch the 10B2 video so that you guys can learn how to run these calculators. I'm going to say, so what that totals out to be is you're going to be getting a $250 payment every month. I can do it for the next 30 years. I'm going to be paying you interest at 4.5%, and when all is said and done, even though I'm only paying you $30,000 here because of interest, you're actually going to be making closer to $50,000, and you're getting like $20,000 in interest alone, right? So I'm setting everything up there. I'm talking about interest, but what was my hairy arm in that principle? What was my hairy arm in that pitch? Do you know?
No.
Nah, you weren't paying attention.
I wasn't.
you just saw that. The hairy arm is the time that I threw out there. The hairy arm was
the 30 years.
The 30 years.
Okay.
Sellers don't want to accept that amount of money over such a long period of time, right?
They want their, yeah.
But I made that part of the assumed part of the sale, and I'm talking about interest and how wonderful interest is, which it is, and they are going to make a bunch of money off of it, right? But at the end of my speech, and for those of you who are my students, you've got that speech down, kind of memorized, and if you go through the Propelio Academy, you'll hear the speech and you'll understand how to say that word for word to where this really sets them up. But then they're going to come back and they're going to say, man, that sounds really awesome, but there's no way I'm going to do this over 30 years.
Right.
Okay? And that's where you've got them. Now, at that point in time, you have to work in another negotiation principle, which is the principle of reciprocation. Okay? Now, with reciprocation, we're all used to, like, you give a gift, you get a thank you note, right? You give, you get, you give, you get, you give, you get. That's how we've been trained that from day one as kids. You give, you get. You should never give without get, okay? That's just I'm going to tell you that right now. When you're in this, you never give without get. Every single thing that a seller asks of me, I come back with something else and I say, hey, okay, I'll do that for you, but I'm going to need this, right? And they understand that, and that's an excellent opportunity for you to get some more out of this negotiation.
Before you go on to another tip or topic, what is it that you wanted? If you didn't want the 30-year note, what did you want?
It's a good question. What I want is I want a 0% interest loan that can get paid off within the amount of time that I'm cool with.
Yeah, which could be, what, 5 years, 2 years,
It's typically,
1
so
year?
yeah, that's a good question. It depends on how big that loan is that you're talking with, right? Like if you've got a $5,000, $10,000 loan, you can typically do that in 1 or 2 years. And I'm not going to pitch them on a 30-year hairy arm at first. I might make that a 10-year hairy arm. But once you start passing that $20,000 or $30,000 mark, we've got to keep in mind that we're paying this loan off of the cash flow we're getting on this property, and we still want to make a profit on top of that, right? We don't want to just like be at a net zero the whole time. So we may be getting in $400 a month, and we may only want to give them $200 of that to pay on this loan.
See, to me, that was all, and the reason I was like maybe glazed deer in headlights is because it was like a subtle hairy arm.
Right.
Like, is there, and I'm not trying to be goofy with saying hairy arm, is there degrees of hairy arm? Is because that to me is subtle, but it seems
That's
like
the point.
there's other ones that are like just hit you in the face.
Right.
Now, if it hits you in the face, is that like that probably is not going to work?
Yeah,
or?
to a large degree, yes. I mean, the
you might
point
piss them
of the
off and
hairy
then walk
arm is
away.
that, like, if the guy had gotten that photograph and he'd be like, hey, man, this is a great picture, but what the heck are you trying to do with this stupid hairy arm right here? Like,
Right.
are you trying to get something past me? That wouldn't work, right? If he had made this picture and put a freaking, whatever, bear with a chipmunk riding it on the
But he
back
wanted a
wearing
giraffe.
well, no. I'm saying, like, if it's a picture of a people at a bar scene and he makes it this big and he puts a bear with a chipmunk on the side of it, of course the boss is going to be like, dude, what are you trying to pull here, right?
Right.
The point of a hairy arm is that it's got to be something that they don't realize is a negotiation point.
Got it.
That they feel like they're winning by bringing up. They feel like they're like, oh man, that sounds great, but I got him. Because I'm smart, I got him, and I understand that I'm going to push after this point, right?
So you're giving them the opportunity to win over on you.
Exactly. We want to set up opportunities for them to win because people like winning, and people need that feeling of a concession.
Now, in your experience with the hairy arm, is how many times can you pull that in one negotiation? Is that multiple, or is it's like you're ace in the hole, you can only throw it once out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically, I've got one hairy arm, okay? One thing where I have intentionally gone into it where I say, okay, I'm going to throw this out there, and if they accept my original terms, that's awesome. But if they do not accept my original terms, I have already gone 2 steps ahead, and I've got it set up the thing that I figure they're going to not like, and I know how I'm going to combat that. In this case, we figure they're not going to like the amount of time that we've got set up, and our backup is we're going to ask for that interest to be reduced.